Hi. The desktop RC-505 MK2 and the foot switch-based RC-600 pedal are Boss's new flagship loopers. Normally, I play the intro to these videos myself, but since a lot of what's new here is oriented towards vocal performance, and even I don't want to hear myself sing, I've asked ORI, an artist I'm a fan of who has been performing with the original 505 for years, to help me out a bit in this video. In this video, I'll take a look at what the RC-505 MK2 and the RC-600 can do in detail, with pros and cons compared to each other, and in particular to the original RC-505 Mk1. ORI has also agreed to help try out some of the new vocal effects, so expect more with him later in this video. I'll also include his full performance without me interrupting at the end. Before I start, I don't want to interrupt too much, so please read the on-screen disclosure. Okay, let's start with an overview. Probably the most important thing you should know about these two is that they have essentially the exact same brain. They're sort of like two different controllers for the same looping and effects engine hidden inside, with the exception that the RC-600 has 6 looping tracks and the RC-505 MK2 has 5 of them, and well, obviously that this is designed to be controlled with your hands and this to be controlled with your feet. However, inside they have the same effects, the same number of effects slots, the same track options and looping features, the same rhythms, an identical menu structure with the exception of features relating to mapping the controls, and the same settings and internal audio routing options. They also have the same exact inputs and outputs in the back. 2 mic inputs with phantom power if you need it, 4 instrument inputs, and 6 instrument outputs, 1 main stereo pair and 2 sub outputs, MIDI in and out, and USB for audio and MIDI. Both come with a power supply and can't be run on batteries. USB audio has 2 modes. In generic mode, both are class-compliant devices, but only offer a single stereo output and input pair. If you move these into vendor mode, it means that you'll need a special Boss driver, but in that case, they both offer 8 tracks in and 8 tracks out. They both also have the same input, track, and master effects, around 50 of them, and the same storage capacity, 99 memories or machine and loop states and content, which can store single loops that are up to 90 minutes long and a total of 13 hours of audio content. All this is stored in stereo, by the way. This means you can create multiple performances where some of the loops are already recorded and ready to go. In terms of diving through the menus and changing the settings, the two are also identical. There's a menu or settings menu, mainly for system-wide settings, and a loop menu for settings that are specific to the current memory or song that you're playing. You enter the settings menu or the loop menu just by pressing them. You can always exit to go back up a level. You enter a level by pressing one of these encoders and enter another level like that, exit back up. Occasionally you'll see menus with more than 1 page. The little arrows on the top right corner of the screen will tell you if you can navigate left and right. If there are multiple pages, you can also repeatedly page through them by hitting a key multiple times instead of reaching for the arrow keys every time. You edit parameters with these push encoders. Pressing them down will change parameters faster typically, or dive into a menu if one exists. And then if you exit the menus, you'll face one of a few play screens. These are screens that tell you the status of the loops or status of the effects, as the case may be. And these too are like I mentioned, identical across the board, except again that there are 6 tracks on the RC-600 and only 5 tracks on the 505 Mark II. On both, pressing enter from the play screen will take you to the mixer, which shows you levels for all the inputs, all the outputs, phones, rhythm, and so on. Both are highly customizable audio loopers with many, many advanced features, meaning they can record audio into separate tracks at different lengths with different operating conditions. For example, you could set it that some tracks will loop regardless of what's going on, some trigger one-shot samples, and others act as different parts of a song. So for example, you could set it that this track will be the intro, this will be a verse, this will be a chorus, and this track loops continuously throughout. Another similarity between the two is that you can complement their onboard controls with a MIDI controller and 2 analog expression pedals or 4 analog foot switches. So you could, for example, add 4 foot switches to the RC-505 or add a desktop MIDI controller and control up to 16 parameters with it using the assign function. More on that later. So let's dive a little bit deeper and talk about the effects in both. The effects are identical, but how you use them is where the differences start becoming apparent. Effects live in 4 main places here. You can apply EQ, compression, and noise suppression on the inputs separately. These are always on effects regardless of the memory or song that you're on. Then on a memory level, input effects can be applied to audio incoming before it's recorded onto the loops. You have a virtual pedal board of 4 effects, and you can choose one of 49 different effects for each slot in this virtual pedal board. Now, these buttons don't exist on the RC-600, so to access them, you enter the loop, go to this page, and then access both the input effects, these are the 4 slots. You can turn them on or off, as you would here, and then you dive in to edit the parameters of an effect, which you do by hitting edit and the effect slot over here. So input effects live after the inputs and before audio is recorded into the loops. Then track effects are applied to the tracks after they've been recorded. There are 4 more of these, 53 in total, the same 49 as the input effects, and 4 more that are tempo synced. And again, you access the slots directly here, shift edit to edit the contents of a slot. And then here on the RC-600, these are the track effects. And again, turn them on or off and edit them by pressing the encoder. These knobs, by the way, control a single parameter that's predetermined in the effect. So for example, this is a reverb level. And if I move to this effect, that's the panning delay. Here it's the effect level 2. If we edit the parameter, you'll see what we're changing here. By default, this controls only one effect at a time, the effect that's highlighted with pink or white LED, and you can use the assign function to assign this to additional parameters if you want. Finally, the last layer of effects, the master effects, they live in the menu or system menu on the outputs. And here again, you've got EQ for the 3 output pairs and the compressor and master reverb. The master effects can be applied either to the main or sub outputs or the phones, and the track effects can also be applied either to all the tracks or to individual tracks. Same goes for the input effects. They can be applied to all the inputs or individual inputs. So we won't try out all 53 effects, but let's maybe listen to a few of them. I'll go into effect A and let's edit it. It's a low pass filter. We can see the parameter we're controlling here, the cutoff. There are a few pages here, and there's, say, a resonance control. And additional parameters. If you page left, you'll see parameters that are applicable to all the effects, namely whether they're applied to all the inputs or an individual input, and whether they're momentary or a toggle. So let's page through these quickly. Pass, high pass, phaser. So synth is a fun one that works on vocals too. Let's try this one. And yeah, the list goes on and on. Some of these effects can take MIDI input. For example, the vocoder has a regular version and a MIDI-based version. Let's teleport to ORI's studio for a demo of some of the other effects on vocals. This is the harmonizer. Octave transpose is similar. This is the slicer. The radio effect. The sustainer is an aggressive compressor for Billie Eilish style vocals.
It's just a way. No heart and sea. It's what I mean.
Auto riff transposes incoming audio in one of numerous patterns. Distortion can get aggressive.
On the shade you smash in my innocence, my nature.
Reverse delay. Warp is a kind of auto layering function. And thanks again, Ori. See you in a bit. A final word about the effects. Many of them have a sequencer built in. So let's take, for example, this low-pass filter. It has a sequencer, which we can turn on. And go ahead and set a target. Let's say the cutoff. And then let's set it just to maybe 2 steps. So now it's toggling between these 2 steps. Or let's maybe make it 3 steps. There are additional steps here. So that's pretty cool. And the effects can work obviously in a chain. So this is the reverb or the auto panner, reverb and auto panner. I forget what this is. Guitar to bass. So cool stuff on the effect side. So those are the effects. Let's take a look at the track settings. Again, identical for both loopers. However, you access track settings just by hitting the track button on the 505 for each of the tracks. Here you need to dive into loop, choose the track that you want to edit, and enter it this way. Menus, by the way, work the same way. So if I go into loop here, hang on, go exit, and go into loop. So same deal over here. I can access the menu using the buttons as well. So let's briefly take a look at these settings. Record a simple loop. You can reverse a track, set it into one-shot mode. I think I need to stop to get this going, in which case it'll just trigger once. So you can turn this into a MPC style drum machine or some of the tracks to just launch samples if you like. Panning and play level is clear. You've got faders here, obviously, but you'll want access to play level on the RC-600. And like I mentioned, you can map a MIDI controller to levels here. Let's see if there are other interesting loop settings. Again, I won't go over all of these. There are a few overdub options. You can just keep layering, overdubbing layers as much as you want using the default overdub function, or use one of two replace modes. And then multi-mode just means loops will loop together. If you move a track into single mode, it means that it will replace other tracks in single mode, kind of like a choke group for verse, chorus, bridge style situations. Then a few more track modes. Remember, you can either page or just press this button again. And then bounce will let you record multiple tracks into this track. So turning bounce will activate this track listening to the other tracks. You can play tracks at normal speed, half speed, or double speed. And these loopers do support Timestretch. I'll show you that in a bit. Let's just look at maybe this last menu. You can determine, like I mentioned earlier, whether a track listens to all the inputs or just a few of the inputs. By the way, I split the mic inputs here and didn't split the instrument inputs, but I could if I wanted, so you could have individual tracks listen to individual inputs on the back. Anyway, that's not where all the options, and you also have record and playback options. These are again identical here. And there's no shortcuts to access those, so you need to access them through the menus here. The difference between these options and the previous ones are that these aren't track specific. Anyway, record action will determine whether a track goes from recording into playback or into overdubbing. This setting can't be set on a per track basis, by the way, which I think would have been nice. Then quantization turns overall quantization on or off, and you can determine the quantization amount in the track settings. Auto-rec lets you listen to audio levels coming in through the input, set a certain threshold, and then start a loop the minute audio starts, so you don't have to press the button to start looping. And then on the last page, you can activate bounce overall. Bounce won't work on an individual track unless you turn this on, and then you can choose which tracks participate in the bouncing party. Finally, for the exciting track settings are the play settings, the playback settings. Again, I won't go through all of these. You can fade tracks in and fade them out, determine which tracks participate in all start and all stop. And I think those are the main ones that I wanted to cover. Okay, so up until now, I've been talking about things that are similar between these two. Clearly, they look different, so let's talk about what those differences are. The biggest advantage that the RC-600 has over the RC-505 MK2 is the build quality and the fact that these are foot switches. If you're playing a guitar or keys or any other instrument that requires two hands, unless you have extremely precise foot dexterity, you're likely going to want the RC-600. It has an all-metal enclosure, metal jacks, and just overall feels way more solid than the plastic RC-505 MK2. I didn't drop test either of these, but it's pretty clear the RC-600 would do better taking a beating. That said, clearly the biggest advantage the RC-505 MK2 has over the RC-600 is the many, many more additional direct controls. If we ignore all the common menu settings controls, the RC-600 has 9 physical performance foot switches to control your loops, whereas the RC-505 MK2 has over 30 other physical buttons, faders, and knobs to perform with. The RC-505 MK2 is also lighter at around 4 pounds compared to 6 pounds for the RC-600. Now, one caveat to the fact that the RC-505 MK2 has more hands-on controls than the RC-600 is the shift modes. The RC-600 has 3 shift modes, so 3 mappings that you can apply to these foot switches. And with the RC-505 MK2, you can actually customize these 10 buttons to do different things other than turn effects on or off for a track or edit the track parameters. That's the initial mode. And if you hit undo, then these get a secondary function. They have a default function, which I'll talk about in a bit, but you can also customize the default function. So sort of 20 custom controls here, and 9 times 3, 27 custom controls or foot switches here. Let's take a look at these 3 modes on the RC-600. So by default, in mode 1, the foot switches will do what the white label says. So this will record and play on track 1, and you can activate overdub, We'll go back to record and then stop. And this does the same thing for track 2. This does the same thing for track 3. By the way, a long press on stop erases the track. Then if you hit track select, you enter mode 2, where these labels apply. So these two are record, play, and stop for track 4, record, play, stop for track 5, record, play, stop for track 6. Then you enter the third mode, the third 9 foot switch functions by long pressing track select. In the default third mode, these turn the effects on or off. So if we go into loop and into the input effects, these will turn on or off effects A through C without D. And this will control the track effects, turn them on or off. So kind of do what these buttons do. Now that's just the default routing. So for example, what I did here was in the second mode, I customized these 6 to control tracks 1 through 6. So if I go back to my play screen and let's say, yeah, this one's fine. So you can see this now activates track 1. This will activate track 2. This will activate track 3. This will activate track 4, 5, and 6. And you get the idea. But instead of getting 2 buttons per track, you only get 1. And there's a various order of key presses to go into overdub, stop a track, and erase it with a long tap. In the 1 button per track function, by the way, double tap stops the track. So this custom mapping has nothing to do with the labels on the panel, and you change it by going into the menu. This is a general setting. Go into control function, and then choose which of the 3 modes or shift modes you want to edit. In my case, I changed shift mode number 2. Then you can access each of the 9 pedals, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and just press them to edit. And the screen will tell you what pushing the button, holding it, or click, which is double click, will do. And there are so many different options here. It's pretty crazy how you can map each and every one of these foot switches in each and every one of the 3 modes. By the way, holding and turning will move through the categories fast. And I'll set this back to track 1, play mode 4, which is the way that I like to have it so that I can control all 6 tracks from one page. Same goes, like I mentioned, for these 10 buttons on the RC-505. Just go into the menu, go into control function, then choose which of the 2 modes I want to edit, and choose a track button. By default, it edits the track, which is the way I like it, obviously the default. But again, here you can change it to any number of things, say to reverse a track. So if I wanted, I could have this reverse my track. And I, of course, want to set it to reverse track 1. So let's see how this works. I'll record. Okay, it's in one-shot mode, and I can reverse it. And now this no longer lets me edit track parameters. It's just a reverse function. A few other differences. The LEDs here are brighter and it's easier to see the colors. You might not see this on the camera, but this is blue and this is white, and it's a little bit easier to tell the colors apart from afar here. You can also lock these buttons if you want, so you don't kick them by mistake. So gotta exit this and activate a lock. So these no longer work until you unlock them. Another cosmetic difference, it's much harder to read the labels on the inputs and outputs on the back, but you can see them clearly labeled on top here. I think it would have been nice if they were labeled on top here, so you didn't need to lift the device up to see what's going on. And those are pretty much the main differences between these two. Let's take a look at how these compare to the previous versions of these pedals. I don't have an RC-300 here, but overall the RC-600 lost the expression pedal, lost the track level faders, and got considerably lighter and smaller as a result of that. It gained, however, substantially more brains and I/O, 6 tracks instead of just 3, a better 32-bit sound engine, larger internal memory, 13 hours instead of 3 hours, more effects and effects types. I'll link to a table comparing the two in the description. The more interesting comparison, I think, is the RC-505 Mark II compared to the original RC-505. The track count is the same, but the Mark II can do much, much more with these tracks. The Mark II, pictured on the top here, has way more inputs and outputs. The internal engine, effects, and digital to audio converters and back have been substantially improved from 16-bit to 32-bit floating point. This means that audio quality is better, gain levels are higher, overdubs should be unlimited without loss of quality, and the additional inputs and outputs means you're less likely to need a mixer in your setup. It's not just about additional inputs and outputs, by the way. You can also apply EQ separately to each of the inputs, and dynamics or compression and noise suppression again for each of the inputs individually, whether they're in stereo pairs or not, and you can configure that. Same goes on the outputs side. You can route any track to any of the 6 outputs, again, with any combination of stereo or mono outputs. We've talked about the effects. They've been improved, and there's more of them, and there are 4 track options, not just 3, and you can combine them any way that you like, as opposed to the Mark I 505 where you couldn't use all the effects in all the slots. Aside from having 4 slots in any combination you like instead of 3, you also have per memory 4 banks of these 4 slots. So up until now, as I showed you the effects, we've really only been editing bank 1. If you hold edit with a long press, you'll see that the A turns blue, and now I can move to a different bank of 4 different effects, completely different than the ones on bank A, and there are 4 of these banks, 4 on each side, so 16 here, immediately accessible from within one memory or one song. Like I mentioned, you can send any of the inputs to any of the tracks and any of the effects, but you can only record to one track at a time. Another important difference is the size of the screen. You can see 4 parameters at a time as opposed to just 1, which obviously is a big deal when you're looking at a lot of parameters. You can also change any one of the 4 parameters directly from the encoders. The faders are 50% longer, 45 millimeters instead of 30 millimeters, and you have the extra row of track controls as opposed to just one edit button on the original 505. Recording time, like here, 13 hours instead of 3 on the original 505. The Mark II is a bit heavier and bigger though. It also lost the peak LED on the inputs, but instead you have the mixer, which shows you input levels. There are more play screen options. That's these screens here. Gives you an overview of what's going on within your loops, and rhythms have been expanded significantly. So you've got multiple genres and multiple kits per genre. So you can change that regardless of the pattern. And there are 4 variations per pattern. And you can also load up multiple user patterns. I'll show you how to do that later on. Now, 2 additional features that have been added in both of these compared to the previous versions are mark and bounce. So let's talk about mark. Mark lets you lock an undo point for a track. So normally if you record a track, you can add an overdub, then undo that by pressing undo. And that's how loopers have been working for ages. But let's say that, just pre-populate this loop. I recorded, say, this overdub, and then stopped and then added another overdub. And then added another overdub. Another one maybe. Then maybe another one. Let's go for this. And then let's say that I didn't like this one. If I hit undo, it would only undo that last note. Now what mark does is let you set a spot. Let's go for this one. So let's mark this spot. And I do that in the undo page. And it's blue in this case. And now I can go back and add another overdub. And maybe, let's go here. Add another overdub. And then another one. So if I hit undo it now, it would only undo the last note. But if I hit this, which is go back to the mark point, I'd go back to the first point that I marked. So mark is a nice way to have multiple undos. Like I mentioned earlier, if you have no use for the mark function, you can assign these functions, these buttons, to other functions. The RC-600, by the way, has the mark feature as well, but it doesn't have any pre-mapped switches to control it, so you'll need to give up a foot switch or two if you want to start marking loops here. By the way, while we're on the topic of undo, there's actually one more layer of undo which takes you back to the initial state of the loop called rec mark. There's no dedicated button for that on either looper, so you'll need to give up a button or use an external foot switch to access that function. So what else? Let's take a look at a few more features. Both loopers support Timestretch. Let's maybe go to this one. It's just a loop I downloaded from the Boss library. Anyway, this supports Timestretch, so we could obviously play it faster without impacting pitch, and play it slower where quality might suffer. The slower we go, still pretty good. But yeah, it does get choppy if you take it to an extreme. You can also change it so that the pitch will increase and decrease as you increase and decrease tempo. Boss also offers 2 software companions for these two. You can program your own rhythms using the RC Rhythm Converter software. Programming your custom rhythms isn't very easy, but isn't that hard. You need to first create a MIDI file in your DAW that can include an intro, 4 variations, 4 fills, and an outro. I couldn't find documentation as to which note triggers which sound, but if you broadcast MIDI on channel 10, it'll trigger the drums on either looper based on the kit you're using. Anyway, you create a MIDI file with whatever drum sounds you want. Let's maybe go for this, see how it sounds. Okay. Now, like I mentioned, you can stretch this out, I think, as much as you want, up to 9,000 events, and create different parts of the rhythm. Let's just settle for this. Then you export it, save it as a MIDI file. Let's just call it this. And save. And this is where the rhythm converter comes in. This is a factory example which shows you how a rhythm is structured. You can listen to it, the various sections. And if we go ahead into open MIDI file and find our little file. Oh, it's obviously just 1 bar long, so these sections don't mean much. Let's just set a normal tempo, and we can preview this lovely beat. And if we like it, just apply. Yep. Then just disconnect from the device. And if we go into our rhythms, go into user, and we can find our, here we go, this guy. Maybe increase the tempo. That's it. The second bit of software Boss offers is the Boss Tone Studio. You just check any one of the factory patterns out. And yeah, it takes a bit. There's demos here. And if you like something, you can just download it onto the device. Choose which memory you want to put it into. Let's go for here. Download. And if you like, you can also import your own WAV files and place them into any one of the tracks in any one of the memories. Let's take a look at a few more settings before we head out to the pros and cons. We talked about customizing the inputs, so not much to cover there. We also talked about customizing the outputs. An interesting function that's available here is routing. Track output routing lets you choose which of the tracks goes to which of the main sub 1 or sub 2 outputs. Same goes for the inputs, and you'd use these different outputs if you wanted to apply different external effects to different tracks or different inputs, or record them separately. While we're diving through these menus, if you go into control functions, there's a little extra page here, preferences, where you can change a few more system defaults. I recommend turning on all clear. This lets you long press all start stop to clear out the memories. Same on both, and a double tap Here we'll also clear out the memory that's not on by default. One other little tip, by default, the mic inputs aren't split up, meaning that they're in stereo. So if you hook up one microphone, you'll only hear it in one ear. If you split the inputs up to two inputs, then they'll each be in mono and be heard in both ears. The last bit of menu diving and customization we'll do in this video is talk about the assigns. Assigns are available on both loopers, obviously. So they're in the main menu, and you can hit assign. Assigns let you further customize your looper by layering additional functionality to even more of the onboard controls, or alternatively respond to external MIDI CC messages coming in from an external MIDI controller. There are 16 different assign slots. So for example, the RC-600 doesn't have faders. If you wanted to control a track level using an external MIDI controller, just hit the assign, choose the source, and we can choose any one of the MIDI CCs. Just choose the CC number that corresponds to the fader that you want to control a track level, and then you choose a destination. There are quite a few destinations here: effects levels, effects parameters, and yeah, I'm sure if we look hard enough, we will find track 1 level. These assigns don't apply just to MIDI CCs. So for example, here I could choose, let me find it, one of the foot pedals, expression pedal, one of the effects knobs. So you could take either the in effect knob or the track effects knobs and apply that to destinations as well. Now that won't disconnect the mapping to the active effect. It'll just let you control another parameter in addition to the parameter that's mapped to in the active effect. One final bit of customization: when you're in the main play screen, you can customize what each of these 4 encoders do. This one, for example, changes memories. These I've customized to change microphone 1 level, microphone 2 level. The default for this is the master reverb. And here I've customized these 3 to control the track levels for track 1, 2, and 3 to replace these faders basically and give you direct access to them. Okay, so that was an overview of Boss's new flagship loopers. I already discussed their pros and cons in relation to each other and to the previous generation of loopers. In this section, I'll just talk about a few pros and cons overall. On the pros side, we've obviously come a long way from simple loopers that record and overdub loops. Both loopers are performance monsters with effects and looping options that invite you to explore creative looping. The RC-505 MK2 in particular is a powerhouse looper just because of the sheer number of direct controls, and all you need to do is either stick around to the end of this video and hear ORI in action, or search YouTube for RC-505 and beatboxing or looping to see amazing performances created with the previous version of the 505. I can only imagine what we'll see when people get their hands on this. That said, the job of this section is also to point out things that can be improved, so here we go. On the hardware side, I think a bigger screen could have been useful here. This screen is certainly an improvement over the previous generation, letting you see 4 parameters at a time instead of just 1, but a bigger screen could have been more visible from afar, especially on the floor for the RC-600. In particular, I think what's missing is the function of the buttons once you customize them. Maybe they can fit this on this screen, but I think a bigger screen would certainly be able to show you, as you customize these buttons, what they actually do. I don't think there's much customization to be done here, but I think here it would be impactful. A bigger screen could also show you loop waveforms to give you an indication of the content of the different loops as opposed to just a ring. Beside that, on the hardware side, the screen is a little recessed, so you might miss a part of the bottom row unless your viewing angle is pretty high up. Finally, on the hardware side, mic gain is very good in general, but if you're using an SM7B, you might need to crank gain all the way up or get a cloud lifter style device. On the firmware side, my biggest wishlist feature is to be able to assign some of the effects to be master effects, or to be applied both to the input signal and the track at the same time. So let me explain. Currently, unless I missed a setting in a menu somewhere, effects can only be applied either to the input signal as input effects before it's recorded onto a track, or to audio that has been recorded onto a track as track effects. This means that if you want to apply a delay, say, to your voice or to a synth, that's going to be embedded and recorded into the loop. I think it would be nice if you could apply the effect but only record the dry signal into the loop. So you could, say, play with a delay parameter after a track has been recorded. You could still do that today by applying a delay effect on the track. You just won't hear this effect the first time the track is being recorded. Other features on my wish list are that it would be nice to be able to control the level of individual drums in a kit, and it would also be nice to be able to record to more than one track at a time so that you could record, say, vocals into track 1 and a guitar into track 2 at the same time and then loop them separately. Finally, I think that having only 16 assigns can be a bit limiting, especially if you want to use a MIDI controller with the RC-600. It would be nice to have more assigns or just a default MIDI mapping to things like track level, panning, effects parameters, and more so that you could complement this with a MIDI controller. So that's pretty much it for these two. Stick around for ORI's performance coming right up. Then perhaps check out my ever-expanding book of electronic music ideas, tips, and tricks on Patreon. Hit like if this was useful. Don't forget to ring the YouTube bell to make sure you don't miss the next one. Thanks for watching.
you.